Welcome to Porch Play Chat, sponsored by the American Association for the Child's Right to Play, or more affectionately titled IPA USA. IPA USA is the USA affiliate of the International Play Association. And as part of our efforts to support play, we've introduced Porch Play Chats. And these are just conversations with people who are just as passionate about play as we are. You can find all of the Porch Play Chats, and there's soon to be more than 300 of them that are all free to you. They're about 25 or 30 minutes each, so you could listen to them on your drive to work or from work, or just when you need some additional inspiration. You can find them by going to ipausa.org. Up in that top right-hand corner, click on all the links to our social media, which includes Spotify. If you subscribe to YouTube and friend us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, magically every Monday morning, a new Porch Play Chat will appear. We're uploading all of the existing Porch Play Chats into Spotify already. There's about 20 or 25 of them there. And so you could access those for free as well. I'm Deb Lawrence, and I'm president of IPA USA. And with me on the porch today is Rebecca Nymick. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Rebecca is a certified child life specialist, and in her day-to-day work, she meets with patients and families who are facing a myriad of stressful, overwhelming, and traumatic circumstances. She helps patients to process their feelings through a variety of, of play as a healing modality, and finds that it is not only supportive for patients and their siblings, but also for those who care for their children who may feel helpless and are seeking guidance in the best way to support their child. In her spare time, Rebecca enjoys a quiet, slow down meditation, exercise, and in spending quality time with her family. And so, Rebecca, we're so happy to have you. And today she's going to help us make sense of sensory play. So excited about this topic.
Sure. Thank you. So a lot of what we will talk about today, I think focuses a lot on what is the foundation of sensory play, but what does that look like in a hospital setting? Much of my career has been in the hospital setting, and we recognize that, when you think of sensory play, you think of stimulation and a child's five senses. But why would we want that stimulation for a child in a setting that is already overstimulating for even an adult? And a lot of what we talk about when we talk about sensory play, are those five senses, and how when we think about sensory play and starting to expose a child to those things when they're very young in the environment, then they are more prepared for those more challenging sensory-based experiences as they move through the hospital setting. What we'll talk about today, I just broke everything down into developmental age categories, and I thought we could talk a little bit more about each age and different things that I've seen implemented, research that I've seen that focuses around how to help the children in those specific ages to really have a positive sensory experience in order to help them cope with the environment.
Wonderful. I'm so excited. So let's start. Where should we start?
So before we even get into the age categories, one of the things that I always like to do when I'm talking about sensory play is talking and thinking about the benefits of play and the sensory aspect of it. So we know that sensory play really calms and regulates a child in their environment. It normalizes the hospital experience. It really, for younger children, it fosters those achievement of developmental milestones that when you're in a hospital, when you're attached to an IV pole, or, you're trying to learn more about your environment, but you're, I don't know, 12 months old, that can be really hard. So I think engaging in that sensory play gives you a way that's appropriate for your age to make sense of it. Sensory play, as we know, whether it's in the hospital or not, also really increases those neuro connections to help a child to engage in those more complex, challenging tasks as well. Like we talked about before, when a child life specialist or anyone really implements those things for a child, even a baby, they're learning how to be exposed to sensory things in their environment so that as they get older, it's not hard for them to cope with things like needle sticks and blood draws. And I don't know, even as much as having a band-aid or a bandage taken off of their arm because they've been exposed to positive touch, sights, smells, sounds, and all the things. So I'm going to go ahead and dive into infancy and talk a little bit about the importance of calm and regulation for the environment. So one piece of research that I did take a look at while I was studying a little bit more about sensory play was a research project that was based around it was a hair brushing program for caregivers. So the research basically sets up a routine for the infant in having their hair brushed while also engaging the caregiver in helping them to have their hair brushed with a soft sort of bristle brush. That early exposure to the caregiver's voice, the sensory feeling of the brush on their skin, having it built into a routine, and really just all around practicing that sensory-based learning in their day-to-day can make all the difference for a child, is kind of what the research mentioned.
I have to tell you, if anyone, when in dramatic play, if people were interested in a beauty salon or a hair salon and they wanted someone to practice on, I was the first one. You play with my hair, I'll follow you anywhere.
Right, and it's so calming and it's
Yeah.
so soothing. And so you would, even as an infant, want to anticipate those things because they sensory items and sensory things can help me to calm and regulate.
Mm-hmm.
So we're teaching that skill really early on. Along with infancy, when you're doing something like an infant hair brushing program, there's things like just simple skin to skin touch with a caregiver. That's sensory for an infant. That routine is really important. And then again, we also talk a lot with caregivers about comfort positioning for different challenging experiences. You know, many people that I talk to are like, oh no, we're going to give them their vaccines. And so they're going to be wild and they're going to scream and they're going to be carrying on and they're going to be hard to kind of manage. But really, if we set up something like a comfort position where the child is being held securely by their caregiver in a way that's keeping them safe, but it's not like restraining them or holding them back in a sort of defiant way, well, that's sensory based as well. You know, we're helping them to cope with that overwhelming sensory experience by meeting it with a comforting hold, a comforting position, which also kind of goes along with that sensory based learning.
Love it.
Sure.
And then as
Okay.
they go ahead. No, I think those are wonderful concrete ways that even whether the child's in the hospital experience or not, if you have an infant that's, maybe on the hyperarousal continuum, something has happened and they're really upset and they need to be calm, they need some input, where you rub their back or you soothe them or you rock them or something, then having another type of calming experience, like, would you like to brush your hair? Would you like me to play with your hair? How can I help you feel better? Those are, and sometimes how they want to just snuggle in. Those are wonderful ways to help them get that positive experience of sensory input.
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and move into sort of our toddler category as I kind of broke it down to talk a little bit more about, again, the sensory play, but in this category, how important messy play is for a child. I know a lot of adults will say, oh God, why are you promoting this? It just makes such a mess and it's just everywhere and it's all over the place. But, that's how a toddler's mind works. It's learning and developing that structure, and sensory play can help them to do that because they're making sense of the environment. So I know sometimes I get a little slap on the wrist when it's like, it's going to be messy, but I do think the mess is best. It's so important for the toddler.
The mess is really the point, right?
Yeah, yeah,
That's the point. So if you don't like mess, then maybe working with toddlers and preschoolers isn't the right place for you, right? Because
absolutely.
they need the mess
Hmm.
they need that sensory input of the mess. And
Absolutely.
especially if they're in a home where and parents need to understand the mess too, right? So many times parents are like, don't get dirty, don't get dirty. And when we're like, oh no, that's like part of development. They have to. And so helping parents understand that too, that yeah, they're going to get messy. And messy is the point, not, being careful and being clean. They'll learn that later. So
Absolutely. And the mess actually boosts creativity too. So we're teaching our children to be creative and think outside of the box with the materials that they have. When I play with toddlers, I do a lot of things like touch stimulation through finger painting or like shaving cream. And also, I love the activity where you can do painting in a bag. So we have large plastic like patient belonging bags, and I'll take a piece of cardstock and squirt some paint on it and slide it inside the bag. Give the toddler the opportunity to just squish it and touch it and move it around, listen to the sounds that it makes, feel it with your fingers, feel what it sounds like. Look at the visual of all the colors and the different things that you're making. What are the sounds that we hear that we can actually make too? Are we saying squish, squish, squish? What kind of noises can we make that accompany that squirt, 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 squish, squish, squish? With water play, it's splash, splash, splash. Um, it's language development, it's environmental development, it's messy, but it's so worth it. And it's also strengthening those neurocognitive pathways for a toddler.
yes.
I also, with toddlers, and in any category, I will always brief this too. Um, I always highlight music therapy and reading for a child because though they aren't necessarily like the messy play, it doesn't have like sensory play doesn't always have to be messy either. So while the mess is important, I think sometimes music is language development, but music is hearing, and music is like attuning things to your environment along with reading as well, which kind of brings us into our next category because when I work with preschool children, I find that sensory play can obviously be messy, but I also think that is an age where you can tie in a lot of reading and cross-curricular lessons
Mhm.
to the child's sensory play learning. And that can be important for a preschool setting or a hospital setting. So if you're reading a story about, I don't know, a silly little penguin, or I think there's a story called 10 Little Penguins. If you're reading that story and you're learning about the winter time and you're reading about the penguins in the story, well, then why not take some shaving cream, put it in a dish with some of the toy penguins that I have,
Mhm.
and then the penguins are in the snow or the penguins are in the ice. And it's very cross curricular and it brings it all together for the child. You know?
Yeah. Yes, that integration, so many times because when we were in elementary school, you did math time and then you did literacy and then you may have done something else. No, it needs to be integrated
Yep.
because that helps the child make sense of what's happening. And they're able to have usable skills that they can use in other situations instead of just saying, oh, I only do math during math time, right? You should do math all day.
Yep.
Right? So and
Well,
literacy.
you're right. And when you're doing an activity where you're like the penguins on the ice or penguins in the snow, maybe you're counting the penguins. Maybe you're
Absolutely.
talking about like the language that you're developing. Maybe there's like some science to it. Maybe
Yes.
there's different things that are important in that cross curricular where it's not that we're making them sit at a desk and count the pictures of the how many penguins are in the picture, but they're getting to do it and feel it and live it, which I think definitely sticks more.
Oh, so much better. It makes the world make more sense to them when we
Definitely.
don't silo by subject.
Sure.
Oh, and so what else, Rebecca?
And so I just also wanted to mention too, along with those categories, so many times, no matter what setting you're in, their toddlers, are still coming out of that stage of sort of, I call it staff phobia,
Mm.
where they're comfortable, but sometimes not comfortable with other people and their parents leaving and things happening really quickly. So sometimes I think those sensory fun activities, those engaging environmental normal activities, can be tied in with other staff. So I'll
Mhm.
say to some of my nurses, when you have 10 minutes, go and blow bubbles with with the child. Just play. Do that sensory based thing with them and shout pop when you pop the bubbles and just engage with them in a way that's safe and normal for them and something that makes sense because that's going to go a long way to building your relationship with them in a way that is healthy.
Well, and that they recognize that every time the nurse comes in, it's not something that's going to hurt, right? That
Yeah.
this could be a fun thing and not a something that might be uncomfortable. Yeah.
I recently actually had an opportunity that happened. Um, the child had many blood draws, and it was very overwhelming for a couple days. And then one day, I just gave the nurse the bubbles instead of me doing the bubbles. I just watched from the window as the nurse went into the room, and when the child sat up and tensed up, and was not knew what was about to happen, and then the nurse took out the bubbles. The child's face was like, I don't, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Wait a second. And you could see their body language, just like their shoulders relaxed. The child just like kind of smiled a little bit. And it took a second, but it was like, hey, this person isn't here to hurt me. They're also a safe person. And we're playing bubbles. That's a sensory activity that I know and I can have the control over because I know what it is.
Well, and I think what's so beautiful about that is the nurse must have felt so much better that it's not that the child has this look of fear on their face when she comes in. This time it's like, oh, we're going to play. And
Mhm.
so I have a whole different reaction to the nurse walking in.
I
I
agree.
think that is so key for children who have to be poked a lot or prodded a lot.
Sure. And I always talk about like needle sticks as like a really big one. But there, of course, are other things that, our children have to go through, and that's just one of the small ones. So I just wanted to give a little bit of a plug
I
to
love
how many challenging things a child actually goes through in the hospital and
it.
how deeply they need that ingrained sensory ability to engage.
Mhm.
So I'll go ahead and continue into what I had written for preschool. Talking, I know we talked about like familiar stories paired with um, a sensory specific activity, because those things, while they teach the cross curricular things like counting and reading, um, they also focuses a lot on like cooperative play.
Mhm.
Like cooperative play, learning to follow directions, problem solving. There are other things that we learn, whether we're doing the sensory play in a group setting or an individual setting, um, but they're so important to a child's first early childhood experience. And it always breaks my heart when I know a child has transitioned in the hospital from being a toddler and they're a preschool age now, and they're basically living at the hospital, but they're not actually getting to physically go to preschool.
Mhm.
Like they still have to learn those things, how to cooperate, how to do teamwork, how to follow directions. So I almost feel it being a level of importance that they learn these things, and us as a team trying to find unique ways to help them to do that, because every child deserves a first early childhood learning experience.
Mm.
And that's
That's
kind
why I
of
think that's why I think having child life specialists in a hospital, because everybody else is focused on the medical aspect, and child life specialists are focused on the developmental aspect,
Mhm.
and it helps to balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. And both are very important, especially for a child who might be struggling medically. But you have to have a balance between those so that the child is getting their medical needs met, but also their developmental needs met. And that's why I think the work that you do is so important.
Thank you. And sometimes I will go into a room and I will just say to the parents, part of my job is to normalize the environment. Will you tell me a little bit more about your child? Because I want that parent and that child to feel like they're individuals too.
Mhm.
I don't want it to be this like very black and white hospital setting where where your child is just like a medical number. That's not what we do, you know.
Right.
So a lot of it is, if your child, let's find a sensory activity that works for your child if they're appropriate. You know, in my setting, sometimes that's challenging based on the nature of acuity. But if it's that your child responds really, really well to music, well, let's get music therapy involved, and let's play music at the bedside, and let's find ways to engage the parent in playing the child's favorite songs. Just like diving deeper into what it is the child might already know. I have a child at the hospital that I just adore, who is 1.5 now, and was born in the hospital and is going through a lot of things, and doesn't always have a lot of caregiver support at the bedside. And so um, my buddy has days where he is irritable and cranky and fussy, and it can be frustrating. And sometimes the nurses will say to me, "Oh, he's just in such a bad mood today." But as soon as I start singing to him, he stops crying and he looks at me like, "I know that song. Okay, I can do this." And I think it's really interesting because he's 1.5 now, and he's grown up in the hospital, but he started with music therapy when he was just a couple months old.
Wow.
And so it's carried over for him as the thing that works, you know? So
So
we have
teach those nurses the itsy bitsy spider and the wheels on the bus, right?
yeah, and sometimes it's as simple as having a sensory opportunity to sit in a different position. Like sometimes when you sit a child up and they can see, hear, look at all the different things around them, it changes their perspective, and it's not so much that I am laying here and I'm looking at the ceiling.
Oh yeah.
So, having a bouncy seat or a bouncy seat that vibrates or just sitting them up and talking to them is that sensory stimulation that sometimes I think that they need. But yeah, so music, music is wonderful. It is always a gem when our music therapist comes by, because especially for this specific child, that sensory experience of being involved in music and the songs that he already knows, I can't even describe how relaxed he becomes as soon as you start singing to him.
Oh, that's just so wonderful.
So I'll go ahead. I'll start talking a little bit more about our school age kids and sensory based engagement. Uh, I think that sensory play with our school age kids, school age is sort of a loosely based term, because if you think about a child who enters kindergarten, they're usually about 5.5, 6 years old. But of course, sometimes you have those very, very advanced late 4-year-olds. So, and sometimes the end of the age category changes as well. But
Mm-hmm.
for our school age kids, sensory play functions as a tool for a child to master competency and kind of like advocating for their own needs during challenging experiences. So when we talk about like Eric Erickson, and we talk about industry versus inferiority, it's giving a child the opportunity to master things that will give them control,
Yeah.
that they are feeling competent about those challenging tasks. Slime making, we love to make slime in the hospital. That's another taboo for some parents because they're like, slime doesn't always match well with carpet. I don't
Uh-huh.
know.
Dawn dishwashing liquid is your friend. It takes it out of everything.
I do get that sometimes.
Yeah.
But so we do a lot of like slime making. And sometimes we got these kits at the hospital that I just love, where you can sit with a child and make a sensory jar. So I
Mm,
think if I think back to the ingredients, it's like dish soap, some glitter, maybe it's oil, I forget, but it's a long, thin jar, and you turn it upside down and you
yes.
move it. And so think about how that's a sensory experience to make something like that. Talk about the sounds that it would make, looking at it visually. What does it look like? What do the materials feel like when you're making the sensory jar? But then when you're going through that challenging medical experience where you need to breathe deeply and slowly, how can that coping jar help you? You know?
Yes. Think back about lava lamps. I don't know how many of you ever had a lava lamp, but when I was growing up, there was a lava lamp in my room that was plugged in all the time. And just watching the movement of and those
So
sensory
slow.
bubbles is so calming.
Mhm.
And so I can see how the oil and the water and the glitter and the food coloring in those bottles, those sensory bottles would be, I mean, we use those all the time in the toddler room in, soda pop bottles that have been cleaned and are ready. And then we just put um, duct tape around the caps so they can't undo them. But yeah, so though, and everybody likes that sort of movement. Sometimes people have it on their screen when they're not working on their computer. So that it's that movement that just is so calming to some folks. So I think
And
that's a great
really,
idea.
if a school age child then makes those materials and creates them, and you work with them on how to do a lot of deep breathing in order to calm and center themselves, you almost put yourself out of a job because you're teaching them to be successful on their own with the coping skills that they've developed. And
Yeah.
that's ultimately what any adult, what any child life specialist, what our aim is to teach a child to be successful through those really traumatic experiences in knowing what's going to help me the most. Is
Yeah.
it my sensory jar? Is it the deep breathing I need to do with my sensory jar? Or is it just the sensory jar or just the deep breathing? But when we can teach those things, we're teaching competency. We're doing sensory based learning and we're teaching children to cope at the same time. And I get excited about
That's
it.
beautiful. Right. So I think, as I remember in the before and after school room in the Child Development Center, when children came in from school, where maybe the the school didn't have a lot of recess, or maybe they had been sitting at a desk for the last 2.5 hours. The last thing they wanted to do was to sit at a desk. They needed to move, and they needed to paint, and they needed to play in dramatic play, and they needed to do these sensory experiences that sometimes I think people think they've grown out of them. Oh my goodness, no.
Oh, yeah.
It is just becoming more and more complex for them. I think one of their favorite activities, when I could find them, I can't find them anymore, but we would get the colored miniature marshmallows, and that was just a choice, after they'd eaten snack, because they're always hungry. So you have to feed them. Then when they went outside, then they would come in, and we had a teacher out and a teacher in, so they could flow back and forth as they chose to. But one of the things that they loved was to take toothpicks and make three-dimensional structures with those marshmallows and toothpicks. And they didn't eat the marshmallows. They were too busy working with it. It was so much fun. And then they would take home these three-dimensional things, and their families would be like, whoa, so just know it just gets, and they love silly putty. Oh my goodness. We made silly putty all the time.
And
They made
when we are talking about sensory play, sometimes sensory play can be this like it can be really complex and involve a lot of materials and a lot of ingredients, but I don't want anyone listening to this to think that they can't do sensory play because they don't have all the materials that they need. Not the case. Like, not the case at all. Sensory play can be using your voice to sing a song and tapping on your body, and doing a little bit of like a bear hunt, that famous preschool song that we all love.
Bring on the bear hunt. Oh, I love that.
But like, you don't need to have a lot of materials. Sure, it's fun to have other things and planned ahead stuff, but sometimes those more spontaneous sensory based activities are the things that stick the most.
Yes. And the rhythm, especially in going on a bear hunt, right? The rhythm with the sort of script of going on the bear hunt is an amazing thing for kids to experience and do, and they love it because it's physical as well as repetitive
Mhm.
in the in the actions that you're going to be doing.
And when they see an adult participating right alongside of them,
Oh, so
it
much
changes,
fun.
it just changes everything for
Changes everything.
them.
Changes everything. Changes everything.
Usually, I know that when I participate in a bear hunt, I will do it once and know that I'm probably gonna have to do it 4 times in a row because we're just having so much fun. And
Because
sometimes I think that that's okay. Sometimes it's
yeah.
okay to do it 4 times. Sometimes it's okay to have that messy play where you've just left the playroom very messy because your brain was really scattered and that's what you needed.
Mhm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The other activity that I sometimes do with school age kids, it's kind of a popular one among child life specialists, but we use sand art,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we help children to um, think about what color can attribute to which emotions they're feeling for the day or for the week or in relation to any specific experience that they want to process. And they build their sand art jar based upon, today I felt this much blue. Today I felt this much yellow. And we talk about what each of those colors represent to them. And
Mhm.
sometimes, the child can then choose to keep it that way, or sometimes they want to shake it up because that was all their emotions for one day. So I
Mhm.
think sometimes with an uh, advanced preschooler or a school age child, the sensory sort of sand jar is really helpful. And also teaching them to advocate for the materials that they need next.
Yeah.
I need the blue, or I need the yellow, or I need the red, or I don't need any more of this. Even with slime, sometimes it's, we're teaching them to advocate by asking for what they need. And that's also building competence that's going to help them as they move into adolescence.
Wonderful.
So again, with school age, I always say art and music is great as well. But sometimes for our school age kids, I also think that pet therapy is wonderful. It is so wonderful because it is this experience that is normal, but it's the feeling of the dog on your lap, teaching yourself to breathe deeply with the dog being there. It's visual. Sometimes it's a little bit sensory if they get to like feed the dog a little treat, like they get to feel the dog's nose on their skin. But sometimes I think that it's not about adults facilitating. Sometimes you just need a furry friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When my cats lay on my lap and purr, my blood, everything just goes, ah.
There's a
It's,
science to that. Yes, I agree.
absolutely. So, how often in the hospital setting, how often and where do the pets come from that come in to do pet therapy?
So every hospital is a little bit different. I know that many hospitals have volunteer-based programs for dogs, so the handler and the dog are volunteer-based, and
Hmm.
there's a whole bunch of policies and procedures and things that need to be gone through in order to make sure that we're vetting the handler and the dog and making sure that everything looks really good for their paperwork. Um, so those dogs, a lot of them visit us and come a couple times a month, I think, on our unit. Every unit has a different set of dogs. And
Hmm.
again, it's based on my hospital experience.
Hmm.
But they do a lot of the social visits and provide a lot of coping opportunities for children. But I
Hmm.
do know of other hospitals as well as my own that have a lot of programs that involve facility dogs. So the dog's actually trained at an outside facility, and the handler is trained with them at that outside facility to do more specifically based medical things could be challenging for the child. So we have a dog who eats ice out of a little medicine cup, so he like takes his medicine. Sometimes he's gone in the ambulance with a child, like to model for them, not to ride with them specifically, but to model for them the safety of being in the ambulance. I think the dogs are maybe trained to go on the MRI scanner as well. So those dogs are specifically trained and can also do social visits for sure. But I think a lot of research has been done about pet therapy, and the need for facility dogs is kind of emerging in the last several years.
Oh, I love it. Love it. Love it. So it's time for us to close out, but I just wanted to think about I want you to think about any last tips you can give folks about this topic as we're getting ready to wrap up.
Sure. Before we actually wrap, I did want to touch base some of the things with our adolescents that can still be engaging for them. I do a
Great.
lot of guided imagery and meditation with adolescents. We do a lot of writing and developing music and art therapy, and then the creation of a vision board is sometimes really helpful. Actually had a family the other day who said, "Can we have materials to make a vision board?" Those are also really great, more advanced sensory-based activities for, our teenagers who are obviously not going to play with shaving cream. But,
Right. I
but
don't know.
as we close, I think in the last chat that we had, one of the things that I felt was important that I will always highlight when I close is taking yourself, obviously you need to be safe with the child or the children that you're playing with in a group, but allowing yourself, allowing yourself to just have that moment, that beautiful moment where you are not the gatekeeper.
Mhm.
I challenge you to get in touch with your inner child because it is so, so important to find that deep within you. Even though we have to be safe and we have to be mindful of all those things, have fun. It's not selfish to have fun with the work that we're doing, in knowing that we're helping children, but we're also kind of learning about ourselves along the way. So
Yeah.
please always dive deep and connect in the play that you're doing with the child that's in front of you, um, and try not to be so focused on like the time limits and
Oh, please.
how much
Yes.
time I have. I know that our day to day can be very rigid, but I think it's just important that, um, we stop looking at the clock and we just be, and we
Oh,
need a
thank
lot more of
you.
that. We need a lot more of that in our world
Yeah.
altogether. But it's
Yeah.
mindfulness in play is what it is. It's
Yeah.
being mindful.
Well, and I think that having that point is so important. I always say to people, the clock is an inanimate object. The person in front of you is living. So let's follow the living person and not pay as much attention to the inanimate object. So
Absolutely.
it's
Yep.
so important. Oh, Rebecca, thank you so much. Hang
Thank
in
you.
while I close this out.
Okay, sounds
So
good.
to learn more about IPA USA, please visit our website at ipausa.org. And until next time, keep on playing.